Okay, well, why don't we get started? I'm Peter Tabuns. I'm the Member of Provincial Parliament for Toronto-Danforth. I want to welcome all of you here this evening. Before we go any further, I'm going to read out our land acknowledgement and then I'll go on to the meeting itself. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit peoples. Thank you all for joining this evening. Our meeting is fairly straightforward. The idea is to bring tenants up to date as to what's going on in the political sphere and the organizing sphere and the legal area, to learn from tenants what's going on in their buildings with their communities, and to set the stage for more organizing to protect tenants. Tonight we have a panel of a number of experienced people. We're going to hear from our panelists. Then we'll have questions and answers for close to an hour, and then we'll have wrap-up comments. Our panel for tonight are Councillor Paula Fletcher, who I'll introduce at greater length later. Similarly, Carly Wilson from Don Valley Community Legal Services, and also Monique Gordon from ACORN, a really strong tenant protection panel. This evening, if you have questions, you can use the question and answer function on your screen down at the bottom there, and we'll be answering you as the questions are relayed to me. I'll be hosting this evening's meeting. The chat will be disabled, but if you want to communicate with us, please communicate through the questions and answers. So I'm going to start off with a presentation on what's going on provincially. Last week, with one of my staff, Rob Kaufman, who's actually being the Zoom master this evening, we went and met with people in buildings in the north end of Toronto-Danforth. So we were on Gamble, on Gowan, on Cosburn, on Broadview, on Cambridge, Eastmount, and talked to quite a few tenants, got a sense of what was going on in buildings. We found 3 buildings that are now engaged in an above guideline increase process, 20 and 72 Gamble and 10 Hogarth. And in all 3 buildings, tenants are already organizing, and it looks like they're ready to take on their landlord. And I'm quite happy to be working with them. They've also already contacted the Federation of Metro Tenants Associations for their assistance. And I expect that landlords will find that those tenants are not just going to roll over, that they're going to fight to protect themselves. What we found in a number of buildings was a pattern where you had long-term tenants. Landlords were very slow to provide maintenance for the most part. In a way, I think, as a technique of driving those people out, because they want them out so they can crank up the rents. There were a few buildings where, in fact, things were in good shape, where the superintendents in those buildings were very devoted to the buildings and to the tenants, did a good job, and people were pleased with the quality of the maintenance they were getting. But unfortunately, that was an exception. What was really striking to me was how much the lobbies have been fixed up in the last 2 years. Rob and I have been going to apartment buildings almost every year for a number of years. Couldn't go for the last 2 years, and we saw that a lot of money had been put in place. What tenants said to us was that, yes, things looked awfully good in the lobbies, but not necessarily good in people's apartments or in common areas. I was really struck by how much rents had gone up. I think the one that caught my attention the most was on Cosburn. I was told by a tenant who had been there almost 20 years and was paying about $1,000 a month for a 1-bedroom, that when she complained about poor maintenance, her landlord told her that, in fact, her unit would go for $2,000 if she moved out, and that she was getting a great deal and should stop complaining. I'm sure you feel the same as I do. People are paying rent. They deserve services. At $1,000 a month, that landlord's still making money. At $2,000 a month, the landlord's making a killing. We're facing a very tough year in the year ahead of us. Tenants are in a difficult spot. I'm sure that many of you tonight will speak about the situations that you're finding, but people have unpredictable or precarious or uncertain work. Wages have not been going up. pensions have not been going up, social service benefits have not been going up, and so people are very stretched. The cost of food's gone up, landlords are pushing for higher rents. It's not a good situation. At the same time, landlords found that there was a drop in demand during the pandemic. Overall rents in the open market dropped by about 12% at the height of the pandemic, and now they're making up ground. In August, rents in Toronto in the open market went up 5% in 1 month. And you can be sure that the corporate landlords who felt that they had taken a loss during the pandemic are going to do everything they can to recover all that they lost and a lot more besides. You will also know, and this won't surprise you, if you look at the statistics, over the last 10 years, rents have been going up on an average of 5% a year. And in a lot of cases, a lot more than that. We certainly hear about that with landlords in buildings where there is no rent control at all, happily increasing rents by 30%. And of course, when people are pushed out of units or move out of units, landlords in a number of cases simply double the rents and really are making an awful lot of money out of people's very difficult financial circumstances. The limited rent increase that the Ontario government put in place for the pandemic, which didn't stop above guideline increases, but got rid of the guideline increase for 1 year, is coming to an end. And if you've received a rent notice for January 1st, as opposed to a normal time of September 1st or November 1st or December 1st, that's because landlords are saying, okay, this rent freeze is over January 1st, we'll just delay for a few months and then crank up the rent. That sneakiness is not appreciated by tenants, but even worse, apparently from the discussions we had, people got rent increase notices this year contrary to the law, and many paid. And I got Carly Wilson this evening from Don Valley Community Legal Services, who will talk about that. I actually asked her today, she gave me her thoughts, and I think it would be useful for you to hear about it, because if you've paid an illegal rent increase, I think it's worthwhile going after the landlord to see if we can drive that back down. Now, I want to tell you, just at Queen's Park, I'm not the only one who hears from tenants about very tough times with rentals. I took around a petition last week to extend the pandemic rent freeze another year. My other colleagues are doing the same. We're carrying on a petition campaign. We're also bringing forward a revised Rent Control Act as a private member's bill. As legislators, we get to bring laws forward. Now, very tough to get them passed, but it's also something that can be used as a pressure technique against government. And certainly what we're bringing forward, a maintenance standards requirement and an end to the ability of landlords to increase rents to whatever level they want when someone moves out, are very important. We know that if landlords can double the rent by getting rid of a tenant, boy, they are going to want to get rid of that tenant. And Councillor Fletcher can talk to the fights that we've been engaged in against rent evictions, where whole buildings full of people have been driven out, or landlords have attempted to drive them out. She's done amazing work there. You need to hear from her. I know that those aren't the only issues that you're dealing with the tenants. As tenants, the landlord-tenant board, it's all digital, it's all video conference. Hearings have been a huge problem, I think, to great disadvantage of tenants. That's something that we're going to have to address. And obviously, tenants want their maintenance issues dealt with. You pay a lot of money, you deserve a building that's well maintained. So each speaker will address how they'll be assisting in pushing forward this agenda to protect tenants. But before we go to our first panelist, Councillor Fletcher, we've got a poll, and I would ask Rob Kaufman, our Zoom master, hidden behind the screen, to put up the first poll. Okay, so if you're not a panelist, if you're a member of the public joining tonight, could you please vote? Have you received a rent increase notice for 2021? If you have, if you haven't, and if it's more than the legal guideline increase, and I can see people are voting very fast. I guess I'm surprised that so many who haven't received a notice yet, but we'll see what the final numbers are. We're getting up there. We'll give you a few more seconds to vote. And well, you're still voting. I hate to cut off an early vote. I'm a politician. I like a lot of voting to go on. Okay, seems to have come to an end. Sharing the results, the people who've gotten no increase at this point, 40%. Yes, the 1.2, 24%. Above guideline, 36%. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. Okay, Rob, thank you very much for that. We'll go to our first panelist, Councillor Paula Fletcher. Paula's been City Councillor in our community for a while now. And I have to say, in the last few years, we've done a lot of work together. Paula's been a tremendous leader on fighting above guideline increases, but also renoviction, using the powers of the city to back up tenants. Paula, we really appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob, for that, on muting me. There's a lot of landlords and others that might want to mute me, but thank you, Peter, for unmuting me here tonight. So I do want to say thanks for this. It's great to have this webinar with tenants, and I know you folks out there on the call, you know an awful lot already. I was just tuning in, take the temperature, see what's happening. Peter mentioned the renovictions. We have been fighting them. Very sad. You probably all know about 28 Langley, which was the rooming house on Langley, and it wasn't covered by replacement because it was a rooming house. And unfortunately, it was sold now to a private school. But FYI, it's not zoned for the use that the person has bought it for. The city did try to buy it, but we were outbid by a private developer or a private school owner. So I know you'll join me when it's time to oppose the rezoning for a use, taking a rooming house that was very good rent for people that had lived there a long time, and then shoving them out to other parts of the city, and now trying to create a cash cow with foreign students. Let's all say it's not on, and we're going to have a good fight around that when it comes up. You all know that it is the province that has all of the RTA and all of the jurisdiction really over many landlord and tenants issues around evictions, landlord tenant board, rent increases, but the city does play an important role in assisting tenants and investigating property standards issues. So we do fund the Tenant Defense Fund. We have a rent bank if people run into trouble. We do support FMTA financially, and there are grants. And I hope, Peter, you've run into people, they might be with you here tonight on this call, that want to fight their above increased guideline. And through the city, FMTA has money that everybody can get a certain amount to hire a paralegal to fight that. So I'm sure everybody knows about that, which is great. And in 2019, when we really noticed all the renovictions, and Laura and Onan's on this call, we've done posters, you've come to rallies, we've done a lot of work around renovictions because they are abhorrent and taking good housing stock and kicking out people and turning it into cash cows. So thank you, Laura, for all your work on that. And out of that work, we created the subcommittee on the protection of affordable rental housing. And that subcommittee is under the Planning and Housing Committee. Done quite a bit there. There is a tenant advisory group, official one now for the city, which didn't exist before. There had been a ad hoc or quasi group, but this one is one that advises staff. I think I'm very proud that we were able to do that. And we're really looking at dealing with renovictions. There's new resources for tenants. And right now, working with Don Valley Legal and other legal clinics in the city, we're looking at is there any way to be able to apply some of the instruments that were used in British Columbia to have a renovictions bylaw, even though the relationship between the city and BC and the province are different, and New Westminster has its own charter. We're really looking to see how we might be able to do that. There is a website now. If you're facing eviction or you need information, you can go to toronto.ca/renter help. I think, Laura, maybe you could post that into the Q&A so people can see that. It's a new information website for tenants, and it was a direct result of all the work that all of you have done and of having the Protection of Affordable Rental Housing Subcommittee. There's also an eviction prevention handbook, which you can have a look at. And they're now looking for feedback on that until December 31st. It's available again on toronto.ca/renter help. And I know Laura will post that in the Q&A so you can see that. Around the new city bylaw, or what might be possible, we are really looking at what we might be able to do in Toronto. So along with Don Valley Legal and other legal clinics and our staff, we did have a meeting to see what are the little cracks in the armor where we might be able to bring to bear some of the things that they were able to do in New Westminster, but it wouldn't be in our city code, but we would be having to be quite creative. This is, I really want to thank Carly for her fantastic work on the first chart and having a great discussion about that. As soon as we get something that's quite tangible, of course, everybody will know about that. And we'll do that at the committee. We'll probably also have another webinar. You all know about Rent Safe. It is a way to look at the buildings and post them. If you go on the city's website, you'll find that a number of buildings have already been evaluated. And that is, it is only the common areas. So still, if you're having an issue with your own unit, you still have to get in touch so that we can send out the bylaw enforcement officers. Laura says she's not sure everybody can see your comments, but if it's, we'll see how to do that. Maybe Rob could post those somewhere if you can see them, Rob, which has to do with the links for all of these things. All the owners and operators of apartment buildings are required to register and comply with the requirements under Rent Safe, and then they get a score, which anybody can see online, and you can see all of those online. The famous building that certainly worked with ACORN and everyone in the community on of 279 Woodfield Road and getting that up to scratch and all the many things that happened there. Pleased to announce the stairs are finally in the front door. But it has a very low score on Rent Safe. That won't surprise anybody. We did say we'd circle back and see how easily attainable it is for tenants and others to get information on that building before moving in, because it won't be posted on the front of the building, but we're looking at ways that landlords have to make sure that anybody who wishes to can see that that's whatever that score is and how that worked. Very similar to what we did with daycares, where you can go online and you can see how your childcare center matched up against others. So there's further enforcement. This is the first tranche for all the first investigations for Rent Safe. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Love to hear from all of you on how we can really do better organizing in the buildings and in the neighborhoods. So both FMTA and ACORN, they are great organizations and they can help you organize. Peter's office, my office, we're always there to assist you. And perhaps we could bring everybody together in the East End around a broader tenants association that has a bit more oomph to it. That would be something I would really like to hear from you if you think that's a good idea. I know it's in different buildings, but people are pretty overwhelmed after, I don't know about you, but from the pandemic, it seems to be winding down, but all the things that were held in abeyance for all that time, 18 months, are just out in the open now. Pressure's on, no more CERB, no more rent control. It's going to be extremely hard. And we all have to stick together and look after one another, just as we did during the pandemic, to make sure that people aren't losing their housing after the pandemic. So that's all I'll say. Look forward to hearing everybody else on the call. And again, thank you, Peter, for organizing this tonight.
Paula, thanks very much. That was very useful. Before I go on to Carly, I just want to say, if you have questions out there, there's a Q&A or question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. Just hit that and type it in. When we get to questions and answers, I'll be going down through the list, posing those questions to the panelists. Our next panelist is Carly Wilson from Don Valley Community Legal Services. Carly is a staff lawyer at DVCLS. She got her start in housing articling and then worked for a firm that represented nonprofit housing providers. She did casework at Center for Equality, Rights and Accommodation and joined the housing team at Don Valley this summer. I just want to say to all of you, Don Valley Community Legal Services has been invaluable in providing legal advice to tenants. For my office, for Paula's office, for tenants in buildings all over our community, they've just been willing to go the extra mile to help people. So Carly, I'm very pleased that you're able to be here this evening. I know people are looking forward to hearing from you. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a thrill to be a part of the Don Valley team, definitely. I will say we do work tirelessly on behalf of tenants. That's not the only work that Don Valley does. We also work in employment law, health and disability, debt and consumer rights, human rights, immigration, income assistance. So if you are facing legal issues outside of housing, we may still be your first call. So definitely don't hesitate to contact us. To get services from Don Valley, you can just call our intake line. Our intake workers are phenomenal, and they can answer questions. They can give summary legal advice in some cases, and they can also direct you to resources if you need assistance. So that's what I would recommend. And we serve a massive catchment area all the way as far west as the Don River and as far east as Victoria Park. So it's a huge area. I was asked to speak today about issues that we're kind of seeing come up in our absolutely gigantic catchment area that we're serving. And the stuff that we're kind of seeing pop up is issues that are related to the end of the pandemic generally. The same things that come up with reopening have kind of spurred other problems in housing specifically, and the kind of evictions that we're seeing are connected to those. I know I spoke actually on a panel here, part of my role with CIRA a few months ago back in June. And at that time, I was really concerned about N12 notices, the kind where landlords are trying to move into their tenants' units. And I feel like we've seen a slight shift now to N13 notices, those dreaded rent evictions that Councillor Fletcher was just talking about, where now that people have access to trades again, and they have access to renovations and things are happening, people are moving into other places, they're developing, they're getting their feet back under them after the pandemic, we're seeing a rise in rent evictions, certainly. There's an opportunity that's kind of being snagged there. The other piece that we are seeing are those rent increases. So as we were hearing at the beginning, there was in place a thing called Bill 204, which came in October of 2020, and that froze rent increases for the year of 2021. So general guideline rent increases were set at 0%. Your rent could not go up unless your landlord applied for an above guideline rent increase. And that was always meant to be a part-time solution. And it's set to end as of December 31st of this year, which means that rents can go up. Now, a lot of people are used to their rent going up at the same time every year. And that's because your landlord cannot legally, in a rent controlled unit, they cannot legally increase your rent more than once in a 12-month period. So it usually goes up at the same time. But since that 2021 date didn't happen, a lot of people are getting those increases starting January 1st, 2022. So we're seeing a lot of them coming in now. As we saw in that poll, a lot of people are receiving those above guideline or those regular guideline rent increases. And what was brought to my attention today is that some people, even though it was against the law, received rent increases for 2021. So to speak on that just briefly, if you received a rent increase in 2021, it may have been, that's important to know. So if you got an above guideline rent increase, those were still permitted in 2021. It may have been a legal rent increase. If you don't agree with that increase, and if you want to fight it, you can absolutely do so. I would encourage you to contact the resources we talked about today. So ACORN, FMTA, those great organizations that help people fight above guideline rent increases. If you received a regular rent increase in 2021, so like an N1 notice, or you were just told, hey, your rent is going up and you started paying it, the odds are that was an illegal rent increase from a landlord. And so if you received that kind of illegal rent increase, what you can do is you can file something called a T1 application with the Landlord and Tenant Board. A T1 application allows you to get a clarification as to what your legal rent is, and also allows you to ask for a rebate for that amount that you were paying above what your legal rent was supposed to be. So filing those applications is incredibly important. And it's important to do so sooner rather than later. So with changes that were brought in under Bill 184, tenants, if they received an illegal rent increase, or they didn't get proper notice of a rent increase but paid that higher amount for a period of 12 months, they're deemed now to have accepted that as their new legal rent amount. So if you started paying whatever your landlord asked you to pay starting January of 2021, didn't really think twice about it, and you've been paying that for the last 10 months, you're running out of time to challenge that rent increase. So if you received a rent increase in 2021, take a look at how you got it, see if it's a legal or an illegal rent increase. And if it's illegal, now's the time to file a T1 application. T1 applications are $53 to file at the Landlord and Tenant Board. If you know that a lot of people in your building have all received one, it only costs an extra $5 to throw somebody else on that application. So this is a great opportunity to talk to your neighbors and see if you can put an application together as a building and fight this as a group. I know ACORN can say that like there's a huge power in numbers game, definitely when you're dealing with these kinds of issues. So definitely communicate with your community and see what you can do. So that's kind of the issues that we're seeing today. As a last piece, what we're kind of doing to fight these concerns that are happening. Our clinic is, as Councillor Fletcher said, we're working with her office to address rent evictions. We're informing tenants of their rights. I can't shout out our intake workers enough. They get a ton of calls and they let people know what their rights are in certain situations. And if it's a more complicated issue, they pass them over to housing lawyers like myself, and we will take your landlord to task at the Landlord and Tenant Board whenever we can, represent tenants, stand up for their rights that way, and show landlords in a lot of cases that this isn't just business, it is personal. One thing that I struggle with, that with the issues that I kind of raised there with, and the landlord's own use applications, the rent eviction applications, the above guideline rent increases, all of these different things that create kind of tensions between tenants and landlords. When we talk to landlords about what their motivation is, a lot of the times we'll hear it's business, it's not personal. And I think it's a really unsatisfying response, and having a group of tenants come together or having representation at the Landlord and Tenant Board can tell you that it is personal. This is someone's home and they should be fighting for it in whatever ways that they can. And with that, I will pass things back, and thank you so much for letting me speak today.
Carly, thanks. Really appreciate all that you had to say. You folks are amazing there. You really just are.
Totally.
I want to remind people again that if you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A, and I'll be asking them of the panelists when we finish the panel presentations. I see one question asking if we will post minutes and contact information. I just want to let people know that we are recording the panelists. We will be posting this video so that people can access it. We'll send notice out to those who've registered, and we'll be providing contact information to Carly, to Don Valley Community Legal Services, to ACORN, to Councillor Fletcher, and myself. And with that, I'm happy now to go to Monique at ACORN. Monique Gordon is a tenant in Etobicoke and got involved with ACORN to fight for healthy homes and affordable housing in her community. And Monique, it looks like you're fighting for affordable housing and good homes in every community, frankly. She currently sits on the board of ACORN as the Secretary Treasurer. It's a membership organization of low and moderate income people with over 140,000 members in more than 9 cities with 23 neighborhood chapters. ACORN works on issues chosen by members such as affordable housing, the digital divide, remittance justice, affordable childcare, and fair banking. ACORN members have been building power to win campaigns on these issues since 2004. I also want to say, again, with Councillor Fletcher and I, ACORN has been a real ally in fighting against rent evictions. And Monique, I just want to thank you and your organization for always being there and being ready to step up and protect people who are in danger of losing their homes. but also have been really good at calling bad landlords and bad superintendents to account. Councillor Fletcher and I joined ACORN in a demonstration on Cosburn, I guess about a year and a quarter ago, which I thought was really effective and really gave the tenants a boost who'd been dealing with some really abusive treatment. And with that, Monique, if I could turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Peter Tabuns. So my name is Monique Gordon. I'm the Secretary Treasurer for Etobicoke ACORN. I live at 11 Bergamot Avenue, and I work at Casino Woodbine. Thank you for having me tonight to talk about organizing an ACORN. What is ACORN? ACORN is the Association of Community Organization for Reform Now. ACORN's a membership organization of low to moderate income people coming together to fight for social and economic justice. We are a community union, and we get organized to build power to our members so we can make positive changes. We work on issues chosen by our members and develop collective demands, then run campaigns to win what the community wants. Issues such as healthy and affordable housing, internet for all, affordable childcare, living wages, fair banking, and real rent control. So we focus on building power. We always believe there is power in numbers. We think there's 3 ways to have power. Organize money, we'll never have it. Organize members, the power of the people. Election, if you have the numbers, you can win. We focus on organizing the numbers. We do this by going door to door, floor to floor, building to building, block to block, neighborhood to neighborhood, city to city, country to country, getting people involved with ACORN. No matter the issue that tenants of ACORN members are facing, if we have power, we can fight to fix the issue. Power lets us put pressure on policymakers, politicians, and corporations. So I'll give a short example of my building that I live in. We started a tenant association. I didn't know much about ACORN, and through having ACORN to help us out to become a member, we were able to get the media to come to our place, to come to the complex that we live in. It's 4 buildings and 6 townhouses, which make up, I think, 60 townhouses. So it's a big complex. And I could talk of one of the action that we held. We got the media to come out to 21 and 19 Bergamot. And believe it or not, those places were flooded out more than years ago. And our landlord, which is Pinedale Property, did nothing. Up to now, there is still mold. We went down with the reporter, we took pictures, published it. I called the city, and they were mainly telling me, I live on 11, so I need to get somebody that lives on 19 or 21 to complain. And that's so wrong, because I live on the complex. We were there, I went down into the basement, which is where they have their lockers. And what the property manager did, they threw everything out, people's personal belonging. That is so wrong. I'm still to follow up with the guy because it wasn't rent safe because it's a townhouse. I'm still to follow up with him to find out, but he hasn't called me back to say, okay, A, B, C. I called the property manager, this is it, nothing, more than 2 weeks. So this is part of the problem. This is part of the problem. When we reach out to the bylaw officers, sometimes they close cases without letting the tenants know, and that's so wrong. So now for me to find out if it's closed, I got to call back 311, give them the number, and then I'll know if it's closed or not. But I think this is the worst that I've seen. Like us, we get a lot of problem with maintenance, a lot of problems. Where the property manager don't want to do maintenance, so they just put bandage. But like right now, just one quick thing I'm going to say. I called the city about the elevator because the elevator was making a noise, like it's like a rotor going wrong and wrong. And I called the city said it's not them, they don't handle that, call TSSA. I call TSSA, send them email, they get back to me. They said inspector came out and the maintenance guy was on site and they're gonna order the parts. Last week Monday, somebody got stuck in the elevator. Up to now, the elevator is still down. No elevator on one side of the building. So you see, if they do preventative maintenance, instead of being after the fact that something happened, we wouldn't have to go through this. But again, I am super happy for ACORN being in our corner for whatever resources that we need, whether it be media, providing, doing actions. Because numerous times we go in front of the building, in front of the property manager office, and we stand up and we talk. This is what we do. Some of our tenants, they're scared to talk. I can't force anybody, but I will do my part, which is talk. Once I pay my rent, you can't do me anything. And right now, ACORN members are super focused on our campaign to stop renovation and to win the affordable housing in all new developments. Like under the inclusionary zoning, city has been working on a policy since 2018 when we won legislation from the province. ACORN members are demanding require new developments to set aside 20 to 30% of all new developments as permanent, deeply affordable rental housing. We are also demanding the policy is fully phased in by 2025. The city is proposing something much lower, 5 to 10%, and phasing it in 2030. It's really bad. There is a big vote on October the 28th, which we will be speaking at. Then it goes to City Council in November. Email your councillors and resist renovation. Lots of tenants losing their homes because landlord claim they have to renovate and the tenants have to move out. But really, landlord just trying to jack up the rent. We are fighting for new rules that would require building permits before the landlord can apply for evictions. Also tighten rules around what building permits actually require the tenants moving out. Then if the tenant does actually have to move, the landlord is responsible for finding them a nearby apartment and topping up their rent if it's more than the current home. And the landlord has to cover moving costs and the tenants get to move back in at their current rent. We want this in BC and we want to win it in Toronto. And last, we're organizing for the next provincial election. We need to make sure that the next provincial government is actually for the people. Real rent control, extend the rent freeze, and ban AGIs. $10 a day childcare, raise ODSP, OW, and more. Thank you.
Monique, thank you very much.
Most
Really
welcome.
appreciate it. So folks, you've heard from the panelists. We're going to do a quick poll and then I'm going to start going through your questions. We have a fair number right now, but we've still got time. So if you have another question, please use the Q&A function. Give us your question and we'll get through as many as we can. So Rob Kaufman, who's the Zoom master in the background, can you please put up the next poll? Excellent. Does your current rent include the cost of hydro? And you are voting very rapidly. And I raise this because I know a lot of tenants are paying as much in hydro as I pay living in my house.
Yeah.
And I was quite shocked by that when I was going building by building last week. There were people paying as much for a 1 and 2 bedroom as I pay for a 3-story house. And I couldn't believe it. And I know a lot of that is just the cost of administration. When the Liberals brought this forward back around 2010, I fought against this because I knew tenants were going to get dinged, and they have been. Okay, we're slowing down in people who are answering. Okay, Rob, if you could share the poll. So does your current rent include the cost of hydro? Yes, 61%. No, I pay extra, 39%. Okay, So given that the cost of hydro is a more recent development, 61% of you probably are more long-term tenants. Rob, thanks very much for posting that. And we'll go on to questions. Carly, I'm going to start with this one for you. From Angel. Angel, thanks for submitting this. My landlord asked us to sign a new lease that would increase our rent by $300, which we didn't sign, as our understanding is we don't have to. They then served us with an N12 8 days later with incorrect address and date, asking us not to contact him and move by December 3rd, stating the reason was a caregiver would move in for their mother who doesn't currently reside on the property. Is there something we should be doing to protect ourselves? We don't want to move, and he's harassed us previously, saying he would sell his house and move into the unit. Hey, Carly, if you could take that one on.
Okay, unprofessionally, your landlord sounds like he's a challenging person, or she is a challenging person. That is a lot. So, okay, I'm just going to bring it up so I can read here, because I feel like every time I thought the question was done, there was a twist. So, wow. First thing, on an N12 notice, you'll see that there's something called a termination date. And it says on the notice kind of in bold that you must move out by this date or pay a certain amount or something like that. Like it's a bit of a confusing wording. And it's important to know that when you've received an N12 notice, you do not need to move out by that date. If you don't move out by that date, your landlord can then file an application with the Landlord and Tenant Board. You go to a hearing, and if your landlord convinces the Landlord and Tenant Board at that hearing that they're going to use the unit for their own purposes, then they issue an eviction order, and then you are evicted. The eviction process is not your landlord saying get out and then you leaving. It is a process, and you have a right to go to a hearing, and you have a right to argue your case. From what you've said, it sounds like this is what we call a bad faith eviction, which is your landlord is trying to kick you out for whatever reason because they couldn't raise the rent illegally. And so they're making up reasons why you need to leave. So to protect yourself, I guess, let your landlord know, or don't let your landlord know. Either way, you don't have to move out by whatever date they're telling you to. Wait until you receive a notice of hearing saying that you are going to have an eviction hearing. And when you receive that notice of hearing, bring your evidence, contact legal supports. You can contact our office if you're within our catchment area. We can give you advice, and depending on your income bracket, we might be able to give you representation. To fight your case, essentially, and provide your evidence saying that your landlord is trying to do this outside of the rules, that they're breaking the law, that they're trying to evict you for reasons that are other than what they have listed on their notice there. So that's kind of how you can enforce your rights there, is take your day in front of the Landlord and Tenant Board and make your case. I hope that answered the whole question, although again, it was a wild ride from beginning to end.
Carly, thank you very much. I'm going to direct one more to you.
Can I just jump in there for a second,
yes,
Peter?
Paula,
Thank you.
Go ahead.
One of the things that we've been discussing when we're looking at renovictions is it's one thing to say wait, but it's very hard. And I think the person on the line it's very hard to just sit and not do anything. So finding a way that there's a template letter that would send to the landlord saying, I got this, but I'm not going to do anything because it's not proper, whatever. And then CC a bunch of people. You can CC Peter's office, you can CC my office. In other words, you're not just a tenant sitting there waiting for the landlord to do something. There's some way that people need to be empowered a little bit to take not an aggressive stand, but let the landlord know that they know what's going on. So I hope we can talk about that a little bit more, what might be useful and helpful, and not prejudice anything once you get to the landlord and tenant, Landlord and Tenant Board, should it get there. People that know their rights frighten people that try to take people's rights away, actually. I think that.
Good comment. Thank you. I'm going to go to another question, because I think, well, Carly, it's again from Angel. Can a landlord dictate who is living in the unit as he was trying to use a roommate switch as a reason why the rent should increase, even though there have always only been 4 people in the unit, which we told him there would always be 4 people. He also said hydro increased despite one of our tenants being out of province for 8 months and only 3 people being in the unit. It's a house with 2 units in it as well. Our hydro is included, but the basement tenant is paying 30% hydro. I'm not sure how that works. Is there anything we can do about this? And I think the question is, can your landlord increase your rent just because the number of people in the unit has changed or the identity of the people in the unit has changed? Carly?
No. Short answer, no. Long answer, it depends a little. So generally, your landlord cannot really speak to how many people are in a unit. That's something we see come up a lot, where especially if 2 people have a child in a unit, landlords will use that as grounds for an eviction. So generally speaking, depending on who was originally listed on a lease, you may need to amend a lease or change it. It depends on your roommate situation. But as an overarching rule, no, the landlord does not get a whole lot of say about who is going to be in the unit. They cannot raise the rent because somebody else is moving into the unit. They cannot raise the rent because there's another person in the unit and now their utilities have gone up. That's an incredibly common thing that landlords will say, and that is not permitted.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question here from Valerie. A number of you may want to jump in on this because it's both legal and organizational. My landlord sent a notice of increase effective January 1st, 2022, that includes the 2022 guideline, the 2020 guideline, and the 2020 AGI. All of those in a single increase, exclamation mark. They had to cancel the entire 2020 increase in writing shortly before it took effect because of high vacancy in 2020. Tenants started to move out and the landlord was desperate to retain them. Now the landlord claims the 2020 increase cancellation was a temporary, quote, waiver, and are trying to reinstate it. It would appear this waiver is not compliant with the discount clause of the Residential Tenancy Act. The landlord did not secure our agreement and the waiver is not a kind of discount normally allowed by the Residential Tenancy Act. Can our landlord still legally pull off such an increase? Legally, Carly, do you want to speak to that?
I don't want to give a unilateral answer solely
Okay.
because I feel like there's a lot of details there. My gut instinct is that guideline rent increases do not compound over time. And I will leave it there, I think, just because without the numbers in front of me, it's tricky to keep track of all the different pieces there. But I would say that it's definitely, you would have a case to look into that being an above guideline rent increase and an illegal rent increase. And I would get legal advice before agreeing to pay it or for paying anything besides your regular monthly rent. Always try and pay your regular monthly rent.
Okay. Since this seems to apply to a number of tenants, and Carly, your advice is good advice. Get legal counsel before you plunge in, either rejecting or accepting what's here. But since a number of tenants are going to be affected, probably a whole building, Monique or Paula, if you could speak to how tenants should be coming together to deal with a landlord like this.
I'm happy to start. And we have done this a number of times in lobbies and everywhere. I don't know your address, but getting in touch with Federation of Metro Toronto Tenants, and they will send an organizer to the building. You'll drop some flyers, you'll have a meeting inside or outside, depends on the weather getting bad, but maybe in the lobby, depends on the people, or maybe happy to host that as a Zoom meeting and understand what's happening to everybody, apply for the money in order to hire the paralegal, in order to work your way through that, just for yourself and everybody else. It's bringing everybody together to use the resources that we have developed for tenants. Might not have known about that, but that's what I would suggest. And if you want to get in touch with my office at all, we can Councillor_Fletcher at toronto.ca. Happy to provide all the information to you for FMTA. And there's Toronto Tenants. Rob's put that in the chat as well. And then we always get a chance to go out and talk to people. Hopefully more than just you are feeling like that and want some help. But there's strength in numbers, absolutely. And there are resources to help you fight something like this.
Thanks, Paula. Monique, you folks focus on strength in numbers. Do you want to speak about how tenants should be approaching this?
Yes. Tenants can get organized, and you can always reach out to ACORN. The number would be 416, 1 second. I just pressed that. So 416-461-9233. And as Ms. Fletcher said, using the resources that are available to us, like the Defense Fund, applying for, because we didn't apply for that also, but organize, and use Zoom. Because a lot of us, we're scared to meet with each other, use Zoom to have whatever meeting. Get a number. How we do it, I'll just put, okay, Paula Fletcher, room 514, so I know who's who. Get the email address, send it out. Organize, Zoom. ACORN, don't forget ACORN.
Okay, thank you very much. I have one from Mariana. My landlord, a large real estate income trust, terminated all the full-time on-site maintenance staff and outsourced maintenance to a third party. Is this a trend you're hearing about from tenants? Also, there doesn't seem to be a city bylaw or provincial requirement for an on-site superintendent. Is that correct? Can I just say before I turn this question over that yes, Mariana, as we went through buildings last week, one of the things people noticed most often was on-site supers being yanked off, with people having to rely on on-call maintenance people who had, in some cases, quite a distance to go to get to the building. So this seems to be a standard cost-cutting technique. Carly, do you want to speak to that first as to the legalities here? And actually, if I could throw in a question, people were asking me, if our super is cut, don't we deserve a rent cut because we were paying for super as part of our rent? That's the service level we expect. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
That's an interesting question. So in terms of whether or not there's any kind of provincial rules or provincial law saying that you need to have an on-site super, not that I know of. So what your landlord's responsible for doing is ensuring that your property is maintained in a state of good repair. That's the extent of the responsibility there. And so they can do that through having an on-site super, or they can do that through whatever other means they find available. Your question about the service being something you provide, that's an interesting one. I feel like if firing or removing the on-site maintenance workers is such a concern, if it results in some kind of maintenance, like a decrease in maintenance and decrease in the reasonable enjoyment and the standard of repair that you're living in, that's definitely grounds for a T6 application to the Landlord and Tenant Board. So that's a tenant application you can make if you have a maintenance concern. If it's a service that you've lost, there's a different way about doing that. Tenants can apply for rental rebates in the event that they have lost services. I've never heard of it being done for maintenance because of a loss of an on-site super. I feel like that would still probably be better done through a T6 application, but it's definitely an interesting question and worth looking into. Yeah, I'll let other people answer, and then I'm going to jump back in once I have the name of the form in front of me.
Okay. Monique, Paula, could you speak about the kind of service cuts that tenants are seeing? Monique, you must be hearing from your members about this.
Yes, we experienced, so Pinedale having a high turnover of cleaners. They'll come and last like a couple weeks. And at one point we didn't have a cleaner like for almost, I think it was like more than a month. And what they were doing, they were using a superintendent to do the cleaning. And I had to send the property manager email, I'm like, why is that? We're paying our rent, we're paying for the service. So you're pulling the the superintendent to do cleaning when we need him. How do we get our stuff fixed? So we experience it too. But so far we got a cleaner, and we also get back the use of our superintendent.
Paula, did you want to jump in on that?
I do think when you think about moving out the superintendents and then just having people come in casually, that's freeing up a whole unit for the landlord to rent at an exorbitant amount. So this is, tenants pay a lot of money. Tenants pay for all the services. Sometimes people say, tenants, they don't pay any taxes. And then we have to say, tenants pay taxes in their rent. You're covering the landlord's taxes in your rent in order for the landlord to pay the taxes for those buildings. So I think it's just driving down. It's just running for as much money as possible, driving down the standards. And I would encourage anybody that finds themselves in that circumstance to be in touch with RentSafe, because if the standards are falling, then that's being tracked. That's the one thing with RentSafe. If the common areas, et cetera, aren't working and you have trouble with your unit, MLS is there to investigate and to evaluate. So it's an onslaught. I think that's what we're hearing tonight. And I think it's very helpful to have Carly, just to have your quick and dirty legal advice. Like, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. We're not all going to be lawyers, but this might be helpful to have these more regularly. So these really burning questions, what to do, people can ask them. I think it's probably helpful for everybody tonight getting answers.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm going to take a question here from Curie, and I think, Carly, it's yours. I'm sure it will be a quick but not dirty answer.
Sorry. Sorry, I called them quick and dirty. My apologies. Well, she went to law school for many years, so these are just thumbnail answers, but they're really important.
I'll go with thumbnail.
Yeah.
My landlord is refusing to allow tenants to sublease to other tenants who are friends of the current tenant. How can we challenge that? Because the landlord wants to double the rent for any new tenant.
So a landlord cannot deny a tenant cannot deny a subletter without a valid reason. So once again, it's a form that I don't know off the top of my head, unfortunately, but there is a way to challenge it. Yeah, they have to have a good reason to deny subletting to a specific person. That said, you don't have the right to sublet your unit to whomever you want. Your landlord does have that right to deny. They just have to have valid reasons for it. So without knowing any more about it, I would say look into that. Look into kind of the rules around subletting, and see, or ask your landlord why they're saying no to somebody. If it's just because they can't raise the rent, then that's against the rules. I will say subletting is a little bit more complex than people tend to think it is. There's kind of there's a narrative going around that, oh, if I don't want to live here for a minute, or if I just want to transfer my lease to somebody, then I can just sublet it. And that's not necessarily the case. So I would say double check and make sure that subletting is what you're actually trying to do. Check out the rules and find out why your landlord's saying no. And if it's for not a good reason, then you're allowed to challenge that at the landlord and tenant board. To the previous question that we had about the loss of services in a unit, the form that you're looking for is a T3 form. And that's something that tenants can file with the landlord and tenant board if there has been a loss of services, or a reduction in services, or a facility that was previously provided to a unit that has since been taken away, that the landlord stopped providing. It's been discontinued or something. So if you had a laundry room and then you lost it, this is something that you can file. I'm curious, just very personally, to see if there's an increase in these applications, or if tenants take advantage of these types of applications to address the fact that they had a lots of loss of amenities during the pandemic. And I'm just going to put that bug in the general public tenant's ear to check out a T3 application and see if that's something that might apply in your situation. But yeah, that can address those concerns.
Okay, thank you. I I'm going to read out a comment, not a question, but just to give a flavor of some of the things I was picking up on Gamble, Gowan, and Cosburn this past week. From Anna, I've been at 20 Gamble for 10 years. My apartment is in reasonably good condition. I'm a very meticulous tenant. Repairs in the unit are rarely done well or done at all. I found I need to do them myself. The rent goes up every year, but very little is done in the unit. She did note that work was done in the common areas and windows were replaced in all the units a couple of years ago. But I have found that this is a very common complaint of poor maintenance in the units themselves. Now, a question here. How do we know if our rent increase was legal or not? I received a rent increase of 2.2%. I received this letter on August 25th, 2020, and started paying this new amount on the 1st of December, 2020. Now I got another rent increase of 4.2% that I have to pay on 1st of January, 2021. Sorry. Thank you. Carly, can you speak to that as to how people know if their rent increase was legal or not?
Yeah, so it's hard to say because it depends is a lawyer's favorite answer, but I will say the first thing I would say to do is check your N1 rental increase notice. On that notice, it'll tell you if you were supposed to be receiving a guideline rent increase or an above guideline rent increase, and that will change the situation. So in this case, if the increase that you received for 4.2%, that has to be an above guideline rent increase. That's a massive amount. And if that's the case, the steps that you can follow are different. So if it's an above guideline rent increase and your landlord hasn't gotten approval from the landlord and tenant board yet, you don't have to pay that amount just yet. And there's some tenant organizing that you can do to kind of fight that AGI. If it says it's a guideline increase amount and it's a different number than the actual guideline, like this year it is 1.2%. So if they're saying 4.2 instead, then that's an illegal rent increase. So it depends on the situation, but check out the notices. If you didn't receive a proper notice, then it's most likely an illegal rent increase. Your landlord has to give these to you in a prescribed form. And yeah, contact Don Valley for summary legal advice about kind of how to go forward, or any other number of tenant information lines can answer those questions for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Question for Paula. I'd like to hear more about Paula's idea of an East End tenants organization. I think this is a great idea and would like to become involved. Paula.
Well, I'd like to hear more from everybody on the call if they think that's a good idea. We do have ACORN, we have Federation Metro Tenants, we've got a lot. We want people, there's people who want to support tenants, and there's individual buildings. And there's still a lot of times where, you know, there's always a spark plug in every building around rent increases and everything else that you might be in a building and fighting that, but you're all by yourself. So it's just really, how do we find something that's focused on what's an N1, what's an N2, what's an N6, what do you do with all the Ns? And to be able to just have a clearinghouse, to work with FMTA, work with ACORN, and be able to meet with Don Valley Legal and be able to anticipate some of the things that are coming down in legislation. So I think that's really it, but it really has to be who's interested in doing that. I always find when we're in a building, there's one person that's called people, there's one person that's gotten all the notices out, there's one person that's the spark plug. How do they connect with others, really, and stay active and use all the great knowledge to help everybody?
Okay, Paula, thanks very much. I think we have one more polling question before we get into the home stretch. Rob, could you bring that polling question up? Okay. Has your landlord asked you to remove your existing air conditioner unit? Because we get a lot of questions about air conditioners. And if people could vote. Yes, no, but they've asked me to move it to a secure window. I don't have air conditioning. while you're voting, I just want to say that this is an issue that's becoming bigger and bigger every year. As the climate gets hotter, our units, which weren't built for these kinds of temperatures, are becoming quite uncomfortable for an awful lot of people. So yes, 24%, no, 36%. No, but they've asked me to move it to a secure window location, 11%. I don't have air conditioning, 29%. All right, thank you very much. And that's the last poll of the evening. I'm going to go to one more for you, Paula, and then go to others. Regarding calculating rent for TCHC tenants who draw EI benefits, rent is calculated the same way as if a tenant is working. It's the same formula. Could City Council look into developing a formula for tenants, for TCHC tenants drawing EI benefits?
So that's an interesting question. TCHC tenants, in the majority, 85% or 90% are rent geared to income. So it's based on the income, and therefore it's not subject to, as I understand it, rent control, because it's based on that. If you're a market tenant, then that's a different conversation. So it just depends on the nature of your tenancy. TCHC is the largest rent geared to income landlord in the city. So if you need to, can either call Carly or call my office and see what we can do about that. But it's probably based on your RGI. I also just want to say, for the tenant union idea or association, one of the things that we started to do when we did this summer, Laura and myself and Peter and Rob, we did a lot of outreach for vaccine clinics around the Cape Cosburn area to get tenants to come down. It was in the community center. There was a bus once on Gamble. But one of the things that we started looking at is who owns all these buildings. And that is a really important thing. Who are these landlords? Because it's becoming very concentrated with a few large companies in a way that it might not have been before. There's not as many family-owned buildings. There's Starlight, there's Ronnie, there's a number of them. So 20 Gamble, of course, that big fight there that Anna was talking about, that was successful. We had to send in the cavalry, the army, into a unit where the woman could not get anything done. MLS came in. So don't forget, we can always get people out to get things fixed when it's an emergency. But the best thing is to be well organized, understand who's out there, what their tactics are, and be able to protect one another in that way.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Monique, could you speak briefly then to how ACORN has organized tenants? As Paula is saying, it takes a lot of tenant power to get landlords to do things. Could you talk about how ACORN has actually made that happen?
They normally would print out flyers. They'll come knocking on our doors, trying to get people to talk up, to speak. They do actions, get the media involved. You name it, they will do it.
Okay, so it's a grassroots, person to person, door by door kind of thing, pulling people together.
Yes.
It's the only technique. It's the best.
It is the best.
Question for Carly. Does Don Valley Legal Clinic help everyone, or do you need a low income? And does Don Valley Community Legal deal with Toronto community housing tenants as well?
Yes, so we can provide summary legal advice to anybody who calls in. So there's no income cutoff to call and get legal information or legal advice, just like a quick couple of questions and answers over the phone. In terms of representation, so having somebody speak on your behalf or go to the virtual landlord and tenant board with you, that does have an income cutoff. So we only are able to do that for low income community members. Regarding Toronto community housing, we absolutely assist tenants that live in Toronto community housing. We provide advice, information, and representation for TCHC tenants all the time. On that note, to the question about employment income and rent geared to income, the administration of rent geared to income and deciding what counts as income is a really complicated provincial and local law soup, essentially, that involves a lot of different pieces of information. One recommendation that I would make to people who are receiving rent geared to income housing and having a lot of difficulty kind of navigating the complicated income reporting requirements, or just like the constant paperwork that you need to do, there's something called housing help centers. You can easily Google what a housing help center is. Housing help center workers will assist people with that paperwork aspect. So they can help you with your income declaration documents. They can help you organize that paperwork. So if you need to redeclare your income, contact a housing help center and just say that you need assistance figuring out how the heck to fill out these forms, because it can get really confusing really quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. Goodness, I just wanted to remind people, we've got about 10 minutes of questions and answers left. If you have a question, you want to send it in on the Q&A, I'll try and get it in before we wrap up. A comment from Donna. It's my understanding that if elevators are not working or always out of service, the landlord can apply for an above guideline increase. Carly, would you be in a position to answer that one?
I'm pretty sure that they can apply. Whether or not the landlord and tenant board will allow them to increase the rent for those reasons would remain to be seen, essentially. So that's it's not as easy as oh, this thing is broken, so they can't increase the rent. It's more of if they're going to increase the rent, they have to kind of make an argument at the landlord and tenant board, and that can factor into why. So if you're having a lot of maintenance concerns and your landlord is applying for an above guideline rent increase that's not going to address any of them, that would be a great opportunity to organize with the other tenants in your building, reach out to FMTA or ACORN and fight that above guideline rent increase to at least have it address the issues that you're actually facing.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, can a landlord ask for an additional payment for running air conditioning in the summer? And Carly, you've probably dealt with this one, but I'm going to say this is not a legal opinion. This is cribbing from emails from lawyers who've been asked this question. If your lease allowed you to have an air conditioner in the past, or if you've had a history of air conditioning without a landlord objecting, then no, they can't ask you. If you haven't had an air conditioner in before and you want to put it in now, they can ask you. But you see, even politicians can learn. It's an amazing thing. Astounding. So I've gotten enough emails and had enough questions on this one. But folks, if you do get challenged by your landlord, don't rely on me. Talk to a lawyer. That's your safest. What I've given you is the general direction. You'll get a much cleaner and more comprehensive answer from a lawyer on this. I had a commentary here from Queenie. And Queenie, if you don't mind, I'm going to quote, because you're not answering a question so much as giving advice to other tenants. And this is useful. I lived in a building in which several tactics were used to force and/or coerce tenants out, including N12s and other forms. We were scared at first, not realizing, as Carly explained, that we were entitled to a hearing. Initially, there had been no hearing scheduled by the owners, but I wanted to warn or inform people that another tactic landlords might use is to then progress to scheduling actual hearings. Again, these started as scare tactics. They tried to cancel the first and asked us not to attend, even though they'd initiated them. Crazy stuff. The next progression of tactics, however, was to schedule a hearing at the landlord and tenant board, but I never received this notice. The landlord had access to the unsecured mail area or not delivered by hand. I just want to let people know that what I found helpful is to check in with the information counter at the landlord tenant board from time to time to try and find out about things. So Queenie, I really appreciate that. But Paula, I'd like you to speak briefly if you could, because in the buildings that we've had where there have been renovictions, you've used the building standards people and the building permit process to fight landlords. And I think people should learn about that.
Yes, we have used
That, and we've also used MLS to go in and look at the degree of repairs required. Salmon Avenue, remember that building, Peter, that they said everybody had to move out? MLS said, these are really small repairs. There's no way anybody needs to move out. As far as buildings is concerned, one of the things that we're really checking out is how the relationship of a building permit to a renoviction. And if there's some way that you can't give somebody a renoviction notice or an N13 if you actually don't have a building permit yet, or if your building permit does not require such an extensive amount of work that somebody would not have to move out. So as we all know, say you have to move out, we're renovating, but most people don't move out with a renovation unless it's massive. So the same that it might apply in a single family home that's with a homeowner should also apply to tenants who are dealing with a landlord. We're really looking into that right now, Peter. That's the crux of potential bylaw around renovictions, if we can get to that.
Okay.
So it's possible, but it's very difficult because there's nothing that requires that to happen yet. It's only, can we get the buildings department there? And whether or not they don't feel empowered yet. So we're all working on that in our subcommittee, along with all the legal clinics and our city staff.
Okay. Paula, thanks for that. So here's another one about reduction in services and what tenants can do about it. My landlord closed the swimming pool a year before COVID. The landlord tenant board refused to provide rent abatement since that passed the 1-year limitation. Can we do anything? And before Carly, I go to you again, when we were going building by building this past week, a lot of people talked about loss of services, not just superintendents, but swimming pools and other facilities that just got locked down, and tenants who had been paying a rent that included that never got a penny back. So, Carly, can tenants do anything about the loss of that service?
In the case that the question is mentioning here, if it's been heard before the landlord and tenant board and they said no, then no. Not a whole lot you can do. It's great that you were able to apply and have your moment to ask for it. And it's a shame that it got caught in a limitation period. That said, we can learn from that experience. If you are experiencing the loss of an amenity and let's say it didn't kick in until the second round of lockdowns, like November last year, now would be an excellent time to file a T3 application because you do have those limitation periods and it's important to catch them. So yeah, for tenants that lost access to amenities during the pandemic, there's still a window, I think, to file applications to try and get some kind of rent abatement or refund or something for the loss of those services. But if it happened before the pandemic or if it's outside of the limitation periods, then unfortunately there's not a lot you can do.
Okay, thank you. And one other question here. If an eviction, can one consider that an eviction is being done in bad faith? If the eviction is possibly in bad faith, does the landlord have to provide us notarized written statements saying they'll be living in the unit for at least a year from the person who is supposedly moving in?
No. That's my very quick answer. No, but if you're going to a landlord and tenant board hearing, the onus is on the landlord to prove under an N12 notice that they intend to use the unit for a period of 1 year, that whoever they're saying is moving in is going to use it for 1 year. So they have the burden of proof there. They can't just walk in and say, sure, that's what we're going to do. They have to provide some kind of evidence that can come in the form of a sworn affidavit from the people moving in. It can come from some things that I've seen have been agreements of purchase and sale for other buildings that they own, or plane tickets saying that a family member is moving in. They have to show something. They can't just say it and hope for the best. But do you have a right to a notarized or a sworn statement from somebody saying they're moving in? No.
Okay. And I have one here. And it really, this whole question of insecurity and people being pushed out is one that comes up time and time again. We live in a 6-unit, 100-year-old building. Ours is the only unrenovated unit, but it's in good shape and well maintained. Our landlord's good, but has told us she plans to sell the building in the spring. We're afraid of being reno-evicted. Is there anything we can do to protect ourselves? We don't want to move out for renovation because of the expense and disruption. Paula, Carly, did you want to take that one on?
Don't move out. And should you move, you're going to sign the papers, and Carly will tell you more, that says you're coming back. But the fact is that if it's not an extensive renovation, you don't have to move. So you just hold your horses, stay there. Should they sell the building, they sell it with you there. They're obviously just trying to have a lot of rent changes before they put the building up, and would like to make that change. So hold firm. That's my advice to you. But I'm going to leave the last word for Carly.
I would absolutely agree. Don't move out right away. Even if / when you receive a notice of eviction, like an N13 notice saying they need to renovate, wait until you get your notice of hearing so that you can have your day in front of the landlord and tenant board. And when that day comes, they have to prove that they need you to move out for those renovations. And even then, argue that you can stay to the best of your ability. And if it gets to the point that you are going to have to move out, then do exactly what Councillor Fletcher said and say that you would like your right to return. And say that as much as you can. Check in with the landlord frequently if you do move out about how long the renovations are taking and when you can expect to move back in, if that's something that you're interested in. There's unfortunately no real enforcement branch saying or watching over whether or not you get to move back in. It's up to tenants to enforce that right for themselves. But if it's that important to you, then be diligent about it. Don't move out unless you have to. And then when you do, ensure that everyone knows that you plan on moving back in. I will say, like, the general theme of people being forced out of their homes is it's kind of the underlying issue that we're dealing with here. And I was so pleased to hear at the beginning of this panel that the provincial government is at least, you brought in a bill to address that vacancy decontrol issue, that jacking of rents to empty units is such a massive problem. And I think if you look at everything that we've talked about today, it is the underlying concern. It's that there is a motivation for landlords to kick people out of their homes to make more money. And until that's addressed, there's not a whole lot that we can do except kind of slap a bunch of band-aids on everything else and tell tenants to enforce their rights to the best of their ability while dealing with this massive financial motivation. But yeah, in the meantime, stay where you are and enforce your rights. And if you have questions about your rights, call people that can answer those questions. Talk to ACORN, talk to FMTA, talk to me, talk to Councillor Fletcher, who's just like a freaking Rolodex of renoviction information. It's incredible. So do try and use those resources to the best of your ability.
Well put. Okay, folks, we've come to closing up time, final remarks. And I'd like to go in the order of Monique, Carly, Paula, and myself. Monique, if you could give your summary comments, that would be great. You're muted, Monique.
Sorry. What I'll tell anybody is organize. Call ACORN. Know your rights. ACORN also have tenant rights workshop once a month on the Saturdays. I think they were looking into having workshop for how to fill out T6, T2s. Get in contact with ACORN. You wouldn't be disappointed. They have the resources. You'll get printing, you name it. You need 1,500 pages, they'll do it. There's no boundary that they're not willing to cross. Contact ACORN. And thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Monique. Carly.
Yeah, where ACORN says organize, I think from my angle, I say stay as informed as you can. Knowing your rights is so important. Groups like ACORN that put on presentations about tenant rights are invaluable. Groups like panels like this one where you get that information, I think is incredibly important. One thing that I will toss out is don't be afraid to ask those really specific questions, because they can get you down to the nugget of something a little bit more concrete. The number of completely strange questions that my friends ask me every day about their tenancy, 1 in every 50 of them will be an actual, like, actually your landlord can't do that. But when you get those questions, that's when you learn. And so don't be afraid to ask people, talk to your friends about what they've experienced, talk to your neighbors about what they've experienced. Make sure that you know all of your rights as a tenant and make sure that you're enforcing them whenever you can.
Thank you very much. Paula.
Thanks, Peter. And can I just thank you for hosting this tonight? And I think it's been a really effective and a lot of good information. I think that we said, don't afraid to do this. Just don't be afraid that that's the weapon that they use. It is your home. It is your castle, and you want to defend it and protect it, because generally that's your neighborhood. Everything's there. Your doctor's there, your services are there, your school's there, and you want to stay. So really and truly, whatever we need to do to assist you, I think there's a lot of people that can help. But as Monique said, let's get organized. It's the best way. Standing alone is not as good as standing together. And thanks again, Peter. Thanks everybody for being here.
Yeah. Well, and happily I get the last word as the host. It's a wonderful thing. Well, I need to give some thanks as well. Monique, Carly, Paula, you've been a fabulous panel. I think we all learned a lot this evening. And I think that the people who are able to attend are leaving with a lot more information they had than when they arrived. As panelists, we learned from you, the tenants who were part of this meeting, giving us a clearer picture of the conditions that you're fighting, the kinds of problems you're encountering with landlords, and the kinds of solutions that you want to have addressed. I want to thank my staff, Rob, Elaine, and Louise, who did all the work behind the scenes to make this happen. So if things went smoothly, I credit them, and if they went in a strange direction, well, I accept responsibility. To all of you who joined us this evening, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been invaluable the past week meeting with tenants. Really appreciate the phone calls and emails we've received. Monique, Paula, Carly are right. People need to organize. They need to know their rights. They need to stand up for their rights. No one in this world is going to give you your rights. You have to assert them if you're going to have them. All of you, thank you so much for joining us. That's it for tonight. We will be posting this video for access along with contact information so that we can build on this for the future. Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks again very much for being part of it. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.